A very welcome to everyone gathered here for our department's annual association Nutrifest 2023. Let's begin this program with Tamil Thai வாழ்த்து. I kindly request the audience to rise for the நீராறும் கடலொடுத்த நிலமடந்தை கெழிலொழுகும் சீராறும் பதனமென திகழ்பரத கண்டன் செக்கனமும் அதிசிறந்த திராவிடன திருநாடும் தக்க சிறு பிறை நுதலும் தரித்தனரும் திலகமுமே அத்திலக வாசனை போலனை துலகும் இன்பமுற எத்திசையும் புகழ் மணக்க இருந்த பெரும் தமிழனங்கே தமிழனங்கே சீரிழமை திறம்பியந்து செயல் மறந்து வாழ்த்ததுமே வாழ்த்ததுமே வாழ்த்ததுமே. A warm good morning to all invited guests, faculty, students, and all the participants from different prestigious colleges. It gives me immense pleasure to extend you all a very warm welcome on behalf of Department of Nutrition, Ethraj College for Women, for this annual association celebration, Nutrifest 2022. The Department of Nutrition has crossed the milestone of 36 years since its inception with vision to inculcate knowledge and skills for healthy and ethical living scientifically. The logo of the department, Nurturing the Circle of Life, emphasizes nutrition for growth, development, and functioning of human life at all stages. A healthy body is a health adage that has stood the test of time. To understand all the aspects of nutrition and health, understanding about gut and its microbiome is most important. In regard to this, Nutrifest 2022 has been organized on the theme Gut Feeling Comes from the Microbiome. I take this opportunity to invite Dr. S. Varalakshmi Rajan, Associate Professor and Head Department of Clinical Nutrition and Dietetics, to give the welcome address and introduce our guest speaker.
Good morning, everyone. On the occasion of Nutrifest 2021-2022, the annual association meet of the Department of Nutrition, I deem it a privilege to extend a cordial welcome to the guest speaker of the day, Dr.B.Sesikeran MD, former Director, National Institute of Nutrition, ICMR, Hyderabad. Hearty welcome to our chairperson, Mrs. Chandra Devi Tanikachalam, and the members of the board, Ethraj College Trust. A warm welcome to our principal, Dr. S. Kodai, and vice principals, Dr. D.B. Usharani, aided, and Dr. T. Usha Priya, self-supporting. An enthusiastic welcome to all the heads of the departments, and warm greetings to all my colleagues of the department and the dignitaries of other city colleges who have joined us today through this virtual platform. I'm glad to welcome the students of the department to this academic event. I take immense pleasure in introducing our honorable speaker to this august audience. Dr. Sesikeran MD was the director of National Institute of Nutrition, ICMR, Hyderabad between 2006 and 2012. He is a pathologist by training, a researcher par excellence with unfathomable expertise in the fields of nutrition, food safety, and toxicology for almost 3 decades. He has over 120 publications to his credit and has authored chapters in 3 books. He has developed guidelines for probiotics in foods, GM food safety, biosimilar drugs, recommended dietary allowances, and dietary guidelines. He was also a member for almost 12 years and chairperson of the Review Committee on Genetic Manipulation for 2 terms and member Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee as well. He is a fellow of National Academy of Medical Sciences, fellow of the International Medical Scientists Academy, fellow of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana Academies of Sciences. He is a past president of Nutrition Society of India and the public trustee of ILSI. He is also a governing body member of Nutrition Foundation India, Scientific Advisory Committee, Gut Microbiota, and Probiotic Science Foundation India. He is also a chairman of the Scientific Advisory Committee of Protein Foods and Nutrition Developing Association of India. I welcome him once again and request him to deliver the lecture on gut feeling comes from microbiome. Over to the speaker.
Thank you very much, madam, and for the kind introduction.
Thank you, sir.
But I am now no stranger to Chennai because I was born and spent my younger days as a student in Chennai. I was a student of Stanley Medical College, and after that I moved over to Hyderabad. So Ithiraj College is very familiar to me, and it has been there right from even my student days, and many of my cousin sisters were alumni of your college. And it's indeed a privilege for me today to be speaking on this occasion, and I thank all of you, Dr. Savita, the head of the department, and all the other faculty members and students for inviting me today to speak on this particular topic. So I will now try and share my slides. Yes. Now I hope all of you can see my slides.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'll go ahead. Now, we have often heard of a term that you have a gut feeling. See, when you go for an examination, you always say, I have a gut feeling that the question paper is going to be very difficult today. Or you'll say that I have a gut feeling that I may fail in my exam and so on. So the term gut feeling is actually a figure of speech. But we didn't realize that several years later, science will actually confirm the fact that we actually feel from the gut. The gut is the intestines. So we now have enough scientific evidence that there are a whole lot of bacteria residing in our intestine, which are involved in our metabolic pathways and also is responsible for us for a healthy life. And there also seems to be a communication between those bacteria in the intestine and our brain, so that it is possible that there is really something called as a gut feeling. Hippocrates in 400 BC and also many of our Ayurvedic physicians like Charaka and others also knew that the intestine is a very important part of our body, and if the intestines are unhealthy, it means that we will be diseased. So Hippocrates therefore said that death sits in the bowels. So a bad digestion is the root of all evil. And many Ayurvedic physicians, even to this day, will say that if your digestion is good, your gut is good, then rest of your body will automatically be good. We'll now see that why is it so and what is the scientific evidence towards that. The microbiome means all the variety of all the genetic variants of the various bacteria which are present in our body are collectively called as the microbiome. The human microbiome is present in every part of the body. For example, there are about 600 species of bacteria present right from our nose down to the lungs. There are about 1,000 varieties of bacteria sitting on our skin. These are not causing any disease in us, but they are residing and living on us. There are at least 60 species are then present in the urinary tract, and very often the absence of these could result in urinary infections. The intestinal bacteria are the ones which are most studied. There are almost 1,000 species in our intestine. And you also have some in the stomach. So our entire body is actually teeming with a whole lot of bacteria which are not doing us harm, but in fact they are doing us good. And collectively we call them as the human microbiome. We used to think earlier that within the uterus where the baby is growing, the environment is sterile. That means there are no bacteria. But recent science have shown that even there you have plenty of bacteria. You have a lot of bacteria in the umbilical cord, the amniotic fluid, the placenta. So the baby, when it is growing up, it seems to be already in contact with bacteria. The question is, why does nature do this? Why should there be bacteria inside the womb? It is possible that the nature is actually trying to train the baby that if and when it comes into this earth, it will be surrounded by these bacteria, some of them good and some of them bad. And these bacteria in the womb are probably programming the body's immune system to tolerate the good ones and reject the bad ones. So that is a hypothesis, or what we imagine must be the reason why these bacteria are present inside the womb. Now, breastfeeding we know is the best for the child, and we again thought that the breast milk is sterile. In fact, we always used to say that the breast milk is good for the baby because it is wholesome and it is free of any bacteria. But that is not true. The breast milk also has a range of bacteria, and these bacteria have entered into the breast of the mother by migrating from the intestines of the mother. Here again, we want to know as to why should nature give bacteria through the breast milk or the mother's milk. It is possibly again to program the intestinal immune system of the baby so that tomorrow when the baby is faced with other bacteria, it learns to know as to which is the good one and which is the bad bacteria. The vaginal tract through which normally the baby is delivered is also full of bacteria. And it is known that if the good bacteria which are present in the vaginal tract come down or get destroyed due to some reason, this leads to an infection, a problem called as bacterial vaginitis, associated with white discharge and other kind of problems, which is a very nagging problem among women and which can even be the cause for infertility or abortions and so on. So maintaining the good bacteria or the vaginal microbiome is another clinical challenge for us, and that is where again the probiotics are being now used quite often. Now, coming back to the intestine, the stomach has something like less than 10 raised to the power of 3 colony forming units. So the measurement of how many numbers are present of bacteria are designated as CFU per milliliter, or colony forming units. And these include bacteria like lactobacillus, enterobacteria, and even yeast-like substances. The duodenum and jejunum also have bacteria, but the ones which are present maximum are in the large intestine. So the large intestine is the home for a huge number of bacteria, and we know more about the large intestinal bacteria than the other parts of the body. Now, there is also information that quite a lot of these beneficial bacteria are present in our mouth. And once these bacteria are replaced by the bad ones, that is when we start having problems like bad breath, gingivitis, and oral hygiene issues. Now, why are these bacteria present in the intestine? Do they have any function? They have a multitude of functions. To the extreme left of the panel, you will see that it's got protective function. So what they do is These trillions of bacteria occupy the entire inner lining of our intestines. So, when any harmful bacteria were to enter into our intestine through the food or water which we are eating or consuming, they will not allow them to get a foothold in the intestine. So, they occupy the entire space. And not only that, they also produce some antimicrobial factors which we call as bacteriocins, and they also produce a lot of lactic acid and make the pH uncomfortable for any other harmful bacteria to come in. So, which means due to some reason, let us say we taken a lot of antibiotics and we killed all the good bacteria, that is when the other bad bacteria which can cause infection will come in and start living in the intestine and creating problems. So maintaining these good bacteria or the microbiome in the intestine is very important for us to lead a healthy life. The next function is called a structural function. It forms a barrier. The entire intestine is an entry point into our body, and therefore that has to be very strong barrier, like a wall, which will prevent any harmful substances from inside the intestine from entering into the blood system. So these bacteria actually make sure that the cells are so tightly clinging to each other that they form a perfect barrier. They are also always communicating with the immune system or the immune cells, which produce a immunoglobulin which is called IgA, and for them to produce enough IgA, these bacteria are necessary. They also have metabolic functions. Quite a lot of substances we eat in our food are not digestible. So many of these non-digestible material, which we call as dietary fiber, reaches the large intestine, and there these bacteria then ferment that fiber, and then out of that they produce what are called a short chain fatty acid, which like propionic acid or butyric acid. And these short chain fatty acids have two functions. One, they maintain the pH to be a little acidic, but they also are used as energy by the intestinal epithelial cells. They also produce some vitamins, but we are not sure whether these vitamins ever get absorbed back into our body. So you see the variety of protective as well as metabolic functions these microbes do in our body. Along with these microbes, the immune system is also in the intestine. You'll be surprised to know that more than 70% of the immunity protecting mechanism is not in the spleen or in the liver or in any of the lymph node, but it's in the intestine. So you see on the right side a diagram of the intestinal cells. The upper portion is the inner portion of the intestine made up of the bacteria, and the lower one is all the immune cells. So these good bacteria are constantly teaching the immune cells to learn as to what is good and what is not good. This is extremely important when we try to understand why some people are allergic to certain foods and why some others are not. So the immune system is learning from the bacteria about what the environment is, and therefore they know how to protect us. The recent knowledge with which I started this presentation, that there is a feeling in the gut itself, stems from the fact that they have found that there is a constant communication between the intestine and the brain, and the brain and the intestine. We know that the brain communicates with the intestine. So you can recall that whenever you go for an examination, you lose your appetite, your bowel starts moving more often, your stomach feels very funny. All these will disappear the moment your exam is over. So this is because the stress in the brain is being communicated to your intestines. We never knew that the reverse is also possible. So now it is said that quite a lot of information is also passed on in the reverse manner, so that the brain is also able to learn or behave based on how our intestinal bacteria are. So these are all a series of publications which are proven beyond doubt based on reviews that what we discussed just now is actually scientifically proven. The microbial changes during pregnancy, birth, and infancy. I already told you about the womb having a lot of bacteria and the breast milk also containing these microbiome. So let us see what happens from the time the baby is born and starts growing. It is also seen that the kind of bacteria which are present in a non-pregnant woman is different from that which is present in a terminally pregnant woman. So it is found that in the first trimester of pregnancy, the bacteria are very much similar to that a normal woman has. But towards the third trimester, the entire bacterial profile changes. It almost resembles that of a patient suffering from an inflammatory disorder. This is probably a way of reducing the immune rejection mechanism in our body. So the woman during the last periods of pregnancy is actually prone to a lot of intestinal disturbances or any kind of dysbiosis, what we call a dysbiosis, because the bacterial population has actually changed to a little negative type, but it changes back the moment the baby is born. There are also enough studies to show the way a baby is born also decides the kind of bacteria which will enter into the baby. When a baby is born through a normal delivery, most of the bacteria that get into the intestine of the baby are coming from the mother's genital tract. And therefore, these babies have a different set of bacteria compared with babies which are born through a cesarean section. So the cesarean section babies get their bacteria from the environment, whereas the normally born babies get their bacteria from the mother's body. And that is an advantage. So cesarean babies are a little more prone to infections and other things till their body also gets the right kind of bacteria after they are breastfed. So breastfeeding therefore provides the baby the right dose of probiotics. For example, like what we talk about commercially available probiotic. Here nature itself gives the baby the probiotic so that its body's immune mechanism is properly developed. So it is very critical that right from the first day onwards, the babies are fed by the mother, starting with the colostrum and all subsequently until 6 months, not only because of the nutrition which is present in the mother's milk, but also because there are beneficial bacteria. Now, the bacteria are never stable. They keep on changing as we get older and older. And the kind of bacteria in our intestine also will not be the same. It will be different between you and me. It will be depend on the food which we eat. But it is said even within a same family, there are differences in the bacterial composition between the children and the parents versus the grandparents because the bacterial population keeps on changing. You see in the pie charts, the blue part shows the percentage of a particular type of a bacteria, which is one of the most potent ones called the bifidobacteria. And these are there in the baby right from the day it's born. They are there in the breast milk and also in the intestine of these babies till they grow up to a particular age. Now, in conditions where the kind of bacteria or the bifidobacteria are lesser, or the baby's intestine has less of the good bacteria, very often such babies are more prone to develop allergies. The reason is the good bacteria actually teach the immune system of the baby and tell so that which is supposed to be the natural normal protein versus what which are foreign proteins to react to. It is found that when children grow up in extremely clean environment, you know, versus children who are growing up in a relatively less clean environment, I wouldn't say slum-like situation. The intestine of the children who are exposed to a lot of variety of other bacteria during the younger days and who are also breastfed have less risk of developing allergy as they grow up compared to children who are not breastfed and also brought up in a very clean environment with no exposure to other bacteria. So this is what we now call as the hygiene hypothesis. Then as we get older, depending on the food which we eat, if you are eating good food with a lot of fiber, lot of fruits and vegetables, will still have a good composition of the bifidobacteria and lactobacillus species. But as we start eating more and more refined food, lot of sugar-like substances, and then slowly it changes into a little negative one. And as we get older, there will be very few bifidobacteria. And as the bacterial population in our intestines keep changing, the risk of diseases also keeps increasing. It is found that depending upon the kind of bacteria we have in the intestine, it makes us susceptible to chronic diseases or diabetes or maybe even to cancers. Now, this diagram shows the intestinal lining cells right in the center. And to the left is the lumen or the inner side of the intestine, and to the right is the inside or the deeper portion of the intestine. You will find that there are several diseases like inflammatory bowel disease, the metabolic syndrome, where there is a complete change in the kind of bacteria which are present inside compared to the normal situation. And this in turn results in a lot of bacterial cell wall material entering into the deeper portion and coming in contact with the immune cells. Infection doesn't take place, but just the breakdown material of the bacteria, which should not cross the barrier, go through because of the bad food which you are taking. And then the inflammatory cells then think that there is an infection, and then they produce a whole lot of inflammatory cytokines. This is extremely important when we'll talk later on about how this altered the risk of developing serious disease among patients who got COVID-19. So the poorer the diet, the less of good bacteria in the intestine, the more risk of the intestine losing its barrier function, the greater risk of some of the bacterial material coming in contact with the immune system, and the higher probability that these immune cells will produce inflammatory cytokines, so therefore leading to a risk of hyperinflammation. I already mentioned that the kind of bacteria which are present inside will also help immune tolerance. So if we don't have the right kind of bacteria in our younger life, there will be a greater risk of allergy. Infectious diseases, which are very common, every one of us and our children go through episodes of diarrhea sometime during their life. These are temporary changes. The moment the infection is overcome, all the good bacteria come back. So the more good bacteria present in the body, the quicker will be the child's recovery from infections. Now we look at what were the changes which could have possibly happened in COVID-19 patients. So this, we didn't even know that while we were halfway through the second wave of COVID-19, that something in the intestine was responsible for some of the patients with COVID-19, especially the older individuals, people who have diabetes, overweight, obesity, people developing a serious turn and landing up in the ICUs, and some of them unfortunately even die. So the human microbiome was studied. There are more than 16 cases where they studied, and they found that in people who had serious COVID-19 disease, they had a bad kind of bacteria in the intestine. The question always will be whether the COVID-19 infection created the bad bacteria or the bad bacteria led to the seriousness in COVID-19. This still needs to be resolved. It was also found that when there were not very good bacteria in the intestine, even the bacteria in the lung were also not favorable, and this led to a higher inflammation causing pneumonia. So the composition of gut microbiota in patients with COVID-19 was concordant with the severity of the disease. The poorer the composition of the bacteria, the more severe the patient was. The good patients who had a good combination of bacteria in the intestine, they recovered much faster and did not require hospitalization. So the link, therefore, was that if we poorer the bacteria, the greater is the inflammation and greater is the morbidity of COVID-19. So we have two situations. One is called a eubiosis. That means you have normal bacteria in the intestine, which is usually seen in younger age group, not associated with any other disease or comorbidity. These patients have no pre-existing. They're healthy people eating healthy food, Like most of our ancestors probably had good combination of bacteria in the intestine because they were not eating any unhealthy food. This is also possible if we take probiotics, adequate amount of prebiotics, which is fiber, plenty of fruits and vegetables. And people who had this kind of a feature had less of COVID 19 symptoms. On the contrary, dysbiosis is when this is disturbed. The kind of bacteria are not the right ones. These people have more inflammation. They also had other comorbidities like obesity and diabetes. And they were taking a whole lot of medicine. Some of the medicines can also kill the good bacteria. And this led to higher viral replication. So the viral loads were higher, increased oxidative damage. Over and above that, they were given antibiotics by the doctors. Antibiotics further destroyed these bacteria, and all these collectively led to a serious situation where the patient had to be put under intensive care. Now, this was a study which actually showed that altered gut microbiota actually is associated with a leaky gut, which led to the movement of bacterial material into the immune system on the deeper part of the intestines. The microbiome in the lung was also studied, and some of these studies were actually from Australia and Nepal. They found that the lung microbiome by itself, or the bacteria, normal, healthy, or good bacteria in the lung, were destroyed during the early phases of the COVID 19 inflammation, and such patients became worse after some time. So, this actually shows that in every organ in our body, we have bacteria which are protecting us, and if we destroy them either by our habits or the environment, then we get into trouble. The nasal cavity also has a whole lot of normal bacteria. And in patients who had severe COVID 19 infections who were on plenty of antibiotic and antiviral medicines, this normal nasal microbiota got destroyed. So, when they got destroyed, the immunity in the nose became compromised, and that is when fungal infection like mucormycosis took place. Many of you would have seen that some of the patients, the entire nose and mouth was completely occupied by a black fungus, and that was because of the bacteria being destroyed in the nose, and that proved the fact that we need these bacteria to protect us from the environment. Now come to the issue of probiotics. The gut microbiome and probiotics are different. Probiotics are actually beneficial bacteria which we prepare, we culture them, we grow them, and then we give this bacteria as a way of treatment to replace the damaged bacteria or during infections for us to recover faster. So probiotic has now become one of the important armamentarium in treatment of several diseases, not only in the intestine, but elsewhere in the body. So the definition of the probiotic was given in 2001. Very often a question which is asked will be, does the normal curd which we eat have probiotics? The answer is we don't know, because the bacteria in the curd have to have a certain features for them to be defined as a probiotic. What should be there is, number one, they should be present in sufficient quantity. The minimum is, of course, is about 1 billion organisms per milliliter. And they should survive. Once you eat them, they should stay alive in the acid environment of the stomach. They should stay alive in the bile, which comes into the small intestine, and go down to the deeper portions of the intestine, the ability to stick on to the intestine and multiply, and then give the beneficial effects. Only then can we call a bacterium as probiotic. Most of the bacteria which we use to make our curds at home do not seem to have this property. Yes, fermented food is good for health. Curds or buttermilk are extremely good, but we are not very sure whether the bacteria present in them actually act as probiotics. And you also know that the composition of the bacteria in the curd will be different from home to home. So the taste of curd also varies. So we do not know which of the bacteria are good, which of them are not so good. So the probiotic, once you say a probiotic, it should have these. Now we have a number of commercially available curd-like products, which we call the yogurts, in which they add these beneficial bacteria after making sure that they fit into the definition of probiotics. So probiotics and coronavirus disease 2000. So this link was seen, and they found that when in patients who were given these probiotics, their virus entry was slower, the virus anchoring to the lung was lesser, and by improving the gut bacterial population, the morbidity of the disease was they were able to bring down. So the probiotics help restore the microbiome in the intestine of people who had these infections. And probiotics are also being used in the treatment of other viral infections and also neuroinflammatory disease by maintaining the gut balance of bacteria and also by helping in the immune function. But one thing we should realize that probiotic is not a magic bullet and one size does not fit all, because every type of bacteria which is present in the intestine or every type of a probiotic bacteria have a different function. There may be some which are good for the digestion. There are some which are good to have a better immunity. There may be some which to keep down the inflammation, and there may also be some more which are involved in mental function. So the person who is consuming a probiotic should know what he or she is taking, whether it is really going to benefit. Blindly using probiotic most often may not give us any benefit. Now, there was a study on the daily intake of fermented milk using a bacterium called Lactobacillus casei shirota. They did it on marathon runners. Marathon runners, it was found, are very often prone to develop respiratory infections after they do the run or before they start the run. So they gave a set of marathon runners these probiotic bacteria, another set got ordinary milk. And they found that those who took the bacteria, their performance in the marathon was much better because their respiratory function was much better. And they also prevented these runners from developing respiratory infections while they were running their marathon race. Now, what is now some of the emerging science is the one in the area of psychiatry. So now that we have learned that the intestinal bacteria actually communicate with the brain, we are now trying to study whether there is any linkage with many of the neurological and neuropsychiatric disorders, especially in children and adolescents. And we know now that one of our biggest problems for many of our parents is that some children have what is called as an autism spectrum disorder. Autism is not again a single disorder. It has a range of expressions. It was found that autistic children's actually intestinal bacteria are entirely different from that of the normal children. The kind of food autistic children eat was also slightly different. And we do not know whether the bacteria which are there in the intestine of these children was because of the food they ate or was it normally present like that. But what is found is many of these bacteria actually produce neurotransmitter-like molecules, which seem to find its way into the brain. So there's a lot of work now going on to see whether we can alter the intestinal bacterial population by giving these children the right kind of diets and see whether that will improve their behavior and the ability to cope with the world in these autistic children. So this is the gut-brain axis which has been studied. These bacteria then produce a whole lot of neurotransmitters which are normally present in the brain, but now we find that they are also present in the intestine. So if there are studies to show that some of them actually produce a whole lot of serotonin, which finds its way into the brain through the blood-brain barrier, and then maybe contributing to some patients with depression. So the link between the food which we eat and our mental behavior was observed even during the days of Ayurveda. But now the science is actually trying to show exactly how it happens, that it is the bacteria in the intestine, the food which we eat, the action of the bacteria on the food, and the biological active molecule they produce, which seems to somehow influence our human behavior. This is still in the early stages, and we have lots more to learn. There are also studies to show that the bacteria can also produce a substance called TMAO, or trimethylene oxide, some of the bacteria, which has been known to cause heart failure. So, is it possible that the bad diets which we have and the coronary disease which we develop and the cardiac failures, anything to do with these molecules which are produced in the intestine? So, before we conclude, if you look at this diagram, it has got red squares as well as the green squares. The red squares are the negative influences, and the arrows going into the intestine, arrows coming out of the intestine. For example, so what is actually not so good is excessive protein consumption, excessive sugar or fructose consumption, saturated fat, even medicines like proton pump inhibitors and antibiotics have a bad influence on the intestine. So, what does the intestine in turn do? It reduces the saturated short chain fatty acid. It produces all abnormal things which lead to inflammation. It can cause cognitive decline, insulin resistance, so on. But what are the good inputs are a good diet with dietary fiber, adequate intake, a good probiotic intake. Then the good things which come out of the intestine will be better saturated fat, more antioxidants, decreased harmful substance, decreased inflammation, and better insulin sensitivity. So if we feed the intestine with the right kind of material, it'll produce the right kind of substances which will keep us healthier. So this was a saying by a famous philosopher called Ralph Emerson, who said, "What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us." He was probably not referring to the bacteria, but we are using this statement to relate it to the bacteria inside us. Thank you very much. I think that's the end of my presentation. Now I'll have to stop sharing. Okay, have I come out of it, madam?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you,
Okay.
sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your patient listening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your very insightful speech. Your knowledgeable words and evidence-based scientific inputs have helped magnify our knowledge on gut and microbiome. We will now have an interactive question and answer session, sir. The participants may pose your questions in the chat box.
Is there any question? I think anyone can boldly ask a question. You're anyway not visible, so what's the problem?
Good morning, sir. We have some questions from the students, sir.
Oh,
So,
sure.
the first question is, what is the
Yeah.
impact of medical drugs on the health of gut microbiota, sir?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Especially the use of a very wide range of medicines can alter the gut microbiome. Number one are the antibiotics. Very often, when we consume a lot of antibiotics, we are tend to develop stomach upsets or diarrheas and so on. This is because the antibiotics kill the healthy bacteria. So we have to replace them later with the use of probiotics. It is known that even proton pump inhibitors like pantoprazole, omeprazole are also now related to the gut changes in the gut microbiome. Whether to what extent they will actually do harm, that is still not very clear, but they do alter the microbiome. But there are many medicines like metformin and others are also being implicated, but they do change the microbiome, but there is no definitive negative effect. The only thing which clearly gives a negative effect are antibiotics.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. The next question we have in the chat box is, how does practicing enema once a week as a cleaning process have an effect on our gut health, sir?
Yes, this is something which was practiced earlier, that regularly do an enema and then wash the intestine out. Now there is now adequate amount of research going on to see whether this really works. But generally, what happens is, unless it is hygienically done, we may land up introducing some harmful bacteria, which may make the situation worse. The normal bowel movements actually get rid of quite a lot of the negative bacteria from in our gut. The use of purgatives was also practiced in the past. In between, we had given up, but there is now some amount of emerging signs that constant washing of the bowel, not necessarily with enema, but even using purgation, may actually help in getting rid of a whole lot of useless bacteria and recolonizing with a better bacteria. There's one thing I forgot to mention in my talk is there is one new technology which is called as fecal microbial transplant. There are some people who have very severe inflammation because of very bad bacteria in the intestine, and there's no way you can replace it with probiotics. So then what they do is they take fecal tissue from one of the family members, almost like a kidney transplant or a heart transplant, and then it is sort of prepared and injected into this individual who is having bad bacteria. And this good bacteria from one of the family members gets into this and starts growing. And once the good bacteria take over, the inflammation and the diarrhea in these children seems to be coming down. This is fecal microbial transplant is still not standard treatment, but some doctors are doing it on an experimental basis.
Thank you, sir. Does postnatal psychosis have any relation to gut microbiota, sir?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Does postnatal psychosis have any relation with the gut microflora, sir?
Post nasal.
Natal, sir.
Postnatal. Oh, okay. Postnatal psychosis. Okay. No, we do. I have no information on that. That is actually an interesting thing that there are quite a few women postnatally go into depression. And postnatal depression is well known. Whether gut bacteria are contributing to this postnatal psychosis is something very interesting. One can look into it, and I have not come across a publication on that. So, but it is quite possible because the gut bacteria, as I mentioned earlier, during pregnancy, actually changes to a disadvantage kind of a situation, which reverts soon after delivery. It is quite possible that in some of these women who are the postnatal depression, this reversion of gut bacteria after the baby is born is probably not taking place quickly. And that may also be contributing. This is a very interesting observation. And I hope I'll be able to find an answer for that from the literature.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Does pranayama really have an impact on the gut microflora, sir?
I have no idea. Pranayama definitely will have its influence on the lung microbiome, I'm for sure. But whether it has anything to the gut microbiome, the things which are going to have a beneficial effect on the gut microbiome are the kind of food which we consume. If we have the regular healthy food with lots of fruits and vegetables, less of sugar and refined carbohydrates, we are likely to have a healthy bacteria. In fact, less of meat intake is also likely to have a healthy bacteria. It's found that people who consume a huge amount of meat, especially red meat, are likely to have a very unhealthy microbiome, which will lead to chronic inflammation. But pranayama directly on the gut microbiome, I am not sure.
Okay, sir. How does stress affect gut microbiome, sir?
Yes. So we saw the two-way interaction between the brain and the gut. When we have a huge amount of stress, it will lead to a lot of neurotransmitters being produced within the brain. And this will stimulate the vagus nerve, which is the nerve which is connecting the brain to the intestine. And when that stimulation takes place, a whole lot of changes take place in the motility of the bowel as well as the internal environment of the intestine. And that is the time these bacterial composition also might change. And that is how stress alters the intestine. Now, the reverse may also be true. Maybe during stress period, if we have a healthy diet, we can have a healthy bacteria, which in the reverse direction will communicate to the brain to calm down. So don't eat fast food during your exam time. It's not going to do you good.
Can you take? Sir, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Nowadays, especially youngsters, they go in for intermittent fasting. So,
Hmm.
does intermittent fasting alter the gut myobacteria? Is it going to do a harm or is it beneficial?
There's actually no scientific publication relating to that. But my gut feeling is literally is that intermittent fasting will not do harm to the gut microbiome. But in intermittent, see, there are studies in the COVID-19 patient itself that intermittent fasting reduces inflammatory load. So it is quite possible that intermittent fasting reduces the inflammatory load by resetting the bacteria from bad to the good ones, and thereby the inflammation is coming down. Definitely, it will be beneficial. It will be
Beneficial.
unlikely to be harmful.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So we have one question in the chat box. Is there any science to determine unhealthy gut, sir?
Yes. In fact, you have what you can do the microbiome. What again? You take a fecal sample and then you run it and look at the 16S RNA and look at the different kinds of strains which are present. We know the healthy microbiome pattern, and you see what are all the kind of spectrum of bacteria present in that individual, and based on that you will know whether the microbiome is good or not. There are many institutions which are now able to offer these services where based on a fecal sample they can tell you what is the kind of microbiome we have.
Thank you, sir. The last question is, once we have dysbiosis due to antibiotic therapy, how can we repopulate the gut with good bacteria, especially the types of foods, sir?
Yeah. So what we need to do is, when if the post antibiotic, if the diarrhea is fairly severe, you can start taking probiotics. There are a whole lot of probiotics in the market. You can take a good probiotic, but not along with the antibiotic. After your antibiotic is over, take probiotic preparations for at least a week or 10 days. Then slowly, as you're able to eat food, switch to food which has got rich in prebiotics, like mostly which have got digestible fiber and so on. And then once the bowel gets regularized, then you can discontinue the probiotic capsules or tablets or syrup which you are taking and then shift over to the normal diet. So this is the best way of handling antibiotic associated dysbiosis.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for patiently answering all the questions.
My pleasure.
We would like to inform the participants that the feedback forms will be posted in the chat box after out of thanks. Kindly fill the same to get your e-certificate. We now conclude this session with the out of thanks. I take this opportunity to invite Mrs. Stella Sherry, Assistant Professor of Department of Nutrition, Food Service Management and Dietetics, to present the out of thanks.
Gratitude is a divine emotion. It fills the heart, but not to bursting. It warms it, but not to fever, said Charlotte Bronte, an English novelist and poet. I, Stella Sherry, deem it an honor to propose the vote of thanks for this online annual association, Nutrifest 2022, on behalf of the Department of Nutrition, Food Service Management and Dietetics Aided and the Department of Clinical Nutrition and Dietetics Self Supporting. I thank God Almighty for His grace today without which this meeting would not have been possible. I place on record my deep gratitude to our honorable and respected chief guest, Dr.B.Sesikeran, former director, National Institute of Nutrition, Hyderabad, a renowned identity and excellence nonpareil in the field of nutrition, for gracing today's occasion and spending his valuable time with us in the pursuit of spreading knowledge of good health among all. Since, sir, your topic, your topic on gut feeling, that gut feeling, which we all instinctively talk about, is really controlled by the gut microbiome. This talk has been especially valuable in the recent pandemic times, where antibiotic abuse is really high among the general public. I take this occurrence to thank all our special guests and faculty who have joined from other colleges, renowned academic bodies such as the Nutrition Society of India, NetProfan, AFST, the IDA Chennai chapter, nutritionists and dietitians who have joined us today in the pursuit of academic excellence. Thank you, participants, for your active interaction via the technological interface. I place on record our gratitude to the Ethiraj College management, our chairperson, Tirumati Chandra Devi Tanikachalam, our principal, Dr. S. Pode, our vice principals aided, Dr. Usharani ma'am, and our vice principal self-supporting, Dr. Usha Priya, who have always been a guiding support for all our endeavors. I wish to thank the heads of department and professors from other faculties who have joined us today. My profound sense of deep appreciation and gratitude goes to our head of the department, Dr. P. Muthu Meenakshi, who has been an active cross bearer and a team player in all the endeavors of the department, and the head of the Department of Clinical Nutrition and Dietetics, Dr. Varalakshmi Rajam, who has always ably supported us. There is no achievement without teamwork, and I wish to appreciate all my colleagues, both the aided stream and the self-supporting stream, with whom I am associated with for the past 18 years, for their willing cooperation for all academic pursuits in this department. In particular, I appreciate the new faculty members, Dr. Sujita and Dr. Savita, who have joined us recently. As faculty in charge of this year's Nutrifest 2022, Dr. P. Savita has been ably coordinating this event under the guidance of the head of the department, and she has meticulously looked into all the details. And we really want to thank her, and we look forward to many such events in the near future. Nothing is wrought without our student support on any academic pursuit. We in the Department of Nutrition strongly believe in nurturing student talent, and I take this opportunity to thank our Association Secretary, Ms. Neha Chandran of the 3rd BSc Nutrition FSM and Dietetics Department, and the Joint Association Secretary, Ms. Manasa of the 2nd year BSc, who have actively involved in this program from day one and have completely taken over the entire technical support needed for this program. I thank the entire student body whose infectious enthusiasm has always inspired us to pursue higher goals. Finally, I thank all our support staff, since no event is complete without them, and the numerous invisible faces who have actively participated to make this event a grand success. Thus, I conclude with a Voltaire quote: "Appreciation is a wonderful thing. It makes what is excellent in others belonging to us as well." Thank you all once again. I now hand it over to the host.
Thank you all for sparing your valuable time to attend this program. We take leave from this program with this inspiring quote by C.S. Lewis: "You are never too old to set in another goal or to dream a new dream." Once again, I thank you all for your participation. Thank you.
Thank you.
We may now end this broadcast.
Success.